All right, welcome back to Reider's Block on the Albuquerque Journal Podcast Network. This episode is presented by TLC Plumbing, Heating, Cooling, Electrical. Episode 2 of the only UNM football podcast, from what I'm aware, devoted strictly to UNM football and Mountain West football as a whole. But we're on episode 2. I am alone in studio today, so just be me talking into the mic. Wanted to engage in a little bit of an exercise after UNM's 5th practice today. This is recorded on a Thursday, so this is, their 5th practice of the spring session under head coach Bronco Mendenhall. We kind of evaluate the confidence levels we have in all of UNM's positions on kind of a 1 to 10 scale. 1 is absolutely no confidence, to be perfectly blunt. 10 is as close to a sure bet that you can kind of get, feeling really, really good, if not great, about that position. We are only 5 practices in, but we have gleaned some things off of how the coaching staff and players feel about some of these positions, and we've also been able to see, relatively limited, but see how these some of these positions are performing. I wanted to start with the offense and the quarterbacks. Quarterbacks are always huge talking point, and for good reason, especially in these parts where you haven't had a ton of great quarterback play over the years. Right now, UNM's quarterback room is led by Devin Dampier. Bronco Mendenhall said last week that he is, he is their quarterback right now. And you can obviously see that in practice. You can see it pretty well just in the way that he's getting all the first team reps, the way he's performing. Bit of a surprise, and this was detailed in the last podcast episode, Justin Holiday. He has been serving as the backup more or less, while DC Tapscott has kind of been the third string. I haven't seen DC throw a ton over the first 5 practices because he's mainly been starting under center in the third string package, where they bring Eli Sanders under center in the Wildcat, and then they split DC out wide, which I thought that was going to be kind of a day 1, day 2 thing. It's the 5th practice, and I saw it today, so I'm very curious about that package as a whole. But right now, I think Devin Dampier is a great place to start, and I think it's a great place to build. I think Devin can be really successful in this league. I think we all got a taste of it when we saw it last year. The way he kind of performed down the stretch in some relatively difficult spots. Fresno State comes to mind. Some of the throws he made that night were terrific. And I got to give Holiday credit. I didn't know for sure after last spring whether he would be sticking around or not, and he's stuck around, and now he's the backup, and it's pretty cool to see, honestly, the way that he's worked his way back up. But Bronco has said, or alluded to the idea, actually, hasn't come out and outright said it, that they probably will add another quarterback and kind of see how that plays out. You do have Isaiah Chavez at the 4th string. I haven't seen any reps under center. I haven't seen any reps of him under center. But there is going to be a quarterback at some point. I'm not quite sure what mold they're going to do. If they're going to go for more of a pure passer or somebody like Devin. I would probably anticipate somebody more like Devin, just because that's kind of how they're constructing the offense right now. And as they've said before, everything runs through the quarterback with this offense. Confidence level, I'm probably going to go with a 6 out of 10 right now. If 5 is just kind of like pretty average, feeling okay, I think Devin's enough to kind of bump you over. I think you want to see another body in that room, and I don't know who you can get at this point, or really you're going to have some people in the April portal window. I'll definitely be intriguing, but depends on who's sold by this program, and that's just kind of remains yet to be seen. And I think a 6 out of 10 is probably pretty fair right there. It gives a little bit of a boost to Devin. This could go up to maybe an 8, depending on 7 or 8, depending on who they add. But I don't know. I think that's a fair read. Running backs has also been a interesting storyline. You have Andrew Henry, who was limited last year with a high ankle sprain, but kind of like Devin in a lot of ways. Came on really strong pretty late. I'm sure they could be a good 1-2 punch with Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, who was obviously sensational last season, but now he's at Arizona. And then 2 transfer additions in Javen Jacobs and Eli Sanders. Jacobs is from Arizona State, where he played relatively sparingly. He's also one of Dampier's high school teammates at Saguaro High School in Arizona. And then Eli Sanders, an Iowa State transfer, who's really athletic. He's not as big as I thought he would be, but really athletic. And I think, like I said earlier, that kind of it's kind of evident with him being used in the Wildcat as much as he has been recently. And he told me last week that that's probably going to be a package that's been communicated to him, that it's going to be a package they're going to be working with. But I feel pretty good about these running backs. I think you want some more depth for the long term. I mean, it is obviously an incredibly physical position. I mean, I thought UNM was in a good spot last year with the depth, even before they added Bill. But once he got into the season, it ended up being, Bill started taking the reins. Andrew Henry was lost with that high ankle sprain. Dorian Lewis broke his foot, and it got kind of thin from there on out. So kind of like the quarterbacks, you do want to see probably one other pretty good quality back. I don't know if they need to add, kind of a heavy hitter like Bill, like they did during the summer last season. But I think this is probably the position I'm the most confident in terms of what we've seen so far through 5 practices, and just kind of the pedigree of those guys. I'll give this a 7.5 out of 10. I think that's a fair confidence rating. Receivers is really interesting to me. It is, I don't think it's quite as deep of a room as last year, and I don't think it's as varied as a room as last year. It's comprised of Caleb Medford, who was ended up being UNM's leader in receiving yards last season with 551 yards. Like Andrew Henry and like Devin Dampier, really came on strong. Really got it going towards the end. Michael Buckley, Ryan Davis, walk-on Terrell Davis, not Broncos great Terrell Davis, but a walk-on. Syracuse transfer Isaiah Jones, Illinois transfer Sean Miller, former Mississippi State transfer Caden Pope, Nick Trujillo, Xavier Van, Luke Wysong, and Evan Wysong. I don't think it's as deep of a room as last season, like I said. I do think they added a potential top option in Isaiah Jones. I haven't seen enough from Jones at this point through 5 practices, which is totally fair. It's only 5 practices, but I definitely think he's got the ability. I do still like what I'm seeing out of Caleb Medford today at practice in the morning. I saw Medford working a little bit with the twos and the kind of routes on air period that they've been leaning on to do offensive work early. I don't know. I mean, I think Ryan Davis can be really good in certain spots. He told me on the first day of spring practice that, his goal, a successful spring for him would be to stay healthy. He hasn't stayed healthy through his last 2 spring practices, I believe. That's what he said. But I don't know. I think you have some nice pieces here. I'm really curious to see how Caden Pope develops. Broncos very high on Nick Trujillo. He's been getting a lot of run with the first team, and he's certainly fast enough to do it. And he looks a little bigger too than he did last year coming in as a freshman. I think confidence level, I'm going to give this a 5 out of 10 right now. That could change pretty easily with some key portal additions, and that could change easily with some injuries. So very curious to see how that plays out, and curious to talk to guys like Micah Simon, the wide receiver coach. He's a very accomplished wide receiver in his own right, played in both the NFL and the CFL, I believe, for a good stint. Tight ends is almost a position I kind of want to take a mulligan on because right now, pretty much all of the tight ends on the roster are in turquoise jerseys at practice, at least what I saw today. You have Everett Hunter, Magnus Gears, Max Lanch, all in some form of non-contact, whether it's an injury or they're coming back from something different. I just haven't seen them on the field really at all. The only guy I have really seen out of that room on the field, I saw him a lot today. He got upgraded from not being in turquoise. Trace Bruckler. He caught 2 touchdowns in the routes on air period I observed today. If he's finally healthy, I don't even know what his initial injury was, but if he's back and ready to go, I'm inclined to say that's a good spot to be able to be in to build in that tight end room. And I'm very curious about his usage overall and the tight end's usage overall in this offense. Like last year, they were a really key part of the offense, and that was communicated a ton, just didn't have a ton of receptions, but they were really key to that scheme. And we haven't seen a whole lot of pad-on-pad, 11-on-11 action, but I'm inclined to think that Bruckler should be able to pick up where he left off. I'm inclined to take a mulligan here just because I haven't seen, I've really only seen one of the guys actually get some full-speed action. So I'm going to hold out for now on that. A little bit of a cop-out for today's exercise. The last offensive position, kind of the biggest question, offensive line. The first and second team combos that I've seen, first team, Wallace Unamba, Baraka Beckett, Jawan Singletary at center, Richard Pierce and Tavian Ford with a little bit of action from Mackenzie Agnello filling in for Tavian Ford. The second team, Mackenzie Agnello leading off there. Matthew Toyolo, Malik Elaine at center. He's a NIMI transfer, originally from Paris, actually. And then Jamarcus Bailey and Travis Gray. It's hard to get a gauge on this offensive line. They're finally in pads at practice, and they look the part in pads, and that's a whole different thing than actually being able to go out and play. And that's kind of the point that Rick Wright made in the first podcast. I don't know. It still feels like such a really big question, and maybe that could be assuaged with a strong performance in the spring game from those units, but that kind of remains to be seen. It's still April 4th, and we're still 16 days out from the spring game, and just haven't, really seen a whole lot to get a good barometer on these guys at this point. But confidence level, I'm going to probably relegate that to like a 3 and maybe even like a 2.5 off that, just because we haven't seen it. And UNM's offensive line last year was probably the overall strength of the team, and they really lost all those guys, with the exception of Isaiah Silman. And I haven't seen a ton out of him this spring in terms of, just getting out there and, within those first and second teams and the like. Moving over to the defense on a similar note, another position with a lot of questions and maybe not a ton of confidence at this point until more is seen. The defensive line. It's the opposite of the offensive line in the sense that there are a ton of returners back. The group of returners, I'm grouping in like defensive ends and defensive tackles right now, so my apologies. But you have Gabriel Lopez coming back, Tyler Keeney, Kyler Drake, Destin Gaynor. Gaynor actually left this week. And then Bryce Santana are all back with some transfers like Okiki Olorunfunmi. Max Elkman is getting some reps too. Zach Doyle is getting some action in there right now. It's a lot of bodies, and there's a lot of bodies of the offensive line right now too. But UNM's pass rush was really an issue last year. It wasn't great to begin with, and it just kind of became more and more of an issue to the point where UNM had to kind of go outside their base defense to really manufacture a pass rush. And, that's good game planning on the last staff's part, but it's not something that you really want to be doing consistently. I think for me right now, it's a similar result in terms of confidence level to the offensive line. You just need to see more out of them. But it somehow feels like a further bridge to cross than the offensive line. I'm going to give it a 2 right now. I know Bronco likes the depth, but I don't know who the guys are in this room that can be true difference makers at this point, and that kind of can really build upon or really, kind of help things out with the pass rush. I know that pass rush isn't all on the defensive line and the defensive ends and all that, but they're a huge part of it. And, that's something that pretty urgently needs to be addressed within this new defense. The corners lost a lot last year. Dante Martin and Zach Morris just overwhelmingly dominated the reps of that position. I think Zach Morris had more snaps than Dante because Dante missed 2 games. 2 games or 1 game, but they both just dominated that position, rightfully so. I mean, Zach ended up being a pretty good corner in his own right. Dante's, he's the school's all-time leader in pass breakups and the like. Right now, you're kind of looking at Noah Avinger, a San Diego State transfer, Pierre Camini Jr., Bryson Taylor, who's been here, and then Northwestern transfer Nigel Williams, who actually got to Albuquerque. I found out the day before spring practice started. I've been dying to talk to him just to hear about that process and kind of going into it. I don't feel unconfident looking at this cornerback room. I've referenced this point already. It's a whole lot of, you need to see it and the like. But, Avinger seems like a really good pickup, and he's looked rock solid in practice and the like. And he's been a starter. He's performed at this level, and when he was good at San Diego State before he lost last season to a season-ending injury. Williams didn't play a ton at Northwestern, but he's got a good recruiting pedigree. I thought Bryson Taylor, I didn't write about him nearly enough last year. I thought in the times he did play, he was pretty solid in a lot of ways. And then, I need to see more of Pierre Camini before I make a truly fair judgment guys like that. And then Bobby Arnold's in that room as well. But I don't know. Right now, I will give that the defense and the cornerbacks in that position probably a dead air isn't great in a show where you're alone, but probably a 4.5 out of 10. But I think that could be changed pretty quickly, and I think that probably lean more towards a 5 in that aspect. I do like who they added in a pretty difficult spot. I know that at the very least, cornerback's going to be well coached. I mean, that this is a staff that really knows what they're doing in terms of the secondary. So I think 4.5 and 5 is a pretty solid confidence rating there. Safeties, that's a room of Christian Ellis, Tavian Combs, who's injured right now. He's trying to be back, I believe, by the end of spring practice, but that might not be the case, at least for his current prescribed timetable. Derek Moore, who came on strong at the end of last season. Noah Pola-Gates, Aaron Smith, Blaine Smith, Hunter Wiggins, and David Murphy. I think this is a defensive position I think you look at and you probably want to feel the best at, right? If Tavian can stay healthy, and if Christian's healthy, and if Derek Moore kind of develops at the pace that you want to maybe expect him to develop at, given how he played last year, I mean, stepping in for Tavian. I know it's a different defense, but I don't know. I think those are 3 pretty strong players to build around and to work with. I thought Hunter Wiggins has done some nice things. He did some nice things last year at the very least, and I'm really curious to talk to Noah Pola-Gates. At some points last year, it just was not his season, was not his game in some ways, but I think there's a lot of talent and ability there. I'm just curious to see how much this new staff is working to kind of unlock that. I'm going to go with a confidence level of probably a 6 out of 10. I think just enough. I think that core is just enough to kind of put you over the edge beyond kind of an average rating. I will wrap this up in terms of defensive positions with linebackers. Right now, that room is Dimitri Johnson, who actually led the defense in snaps played last year, 661. Mahala Santorenas, Jayshawn Lowry, Jaden Wilson, Hunter Hammaker, Skylar Cook, Leonardo Gallegos, Lucas Lucero, Cam Robinson, Samaj Sims, and Mozo Tutelli, who is a Cal transfer. He's actually moved. He played tight end at Cal and was actually moved over to outside linebacker, I think pretty much immediately after. I think that was in the initial transfer press release. I think Dimitri's a really good player to build around in terms of the middle here, but it's not a ton of experience beyond Mahalis. Jayshawn Lowry ended up getting reps last year in terms of Sire Riley when he had a concussion and was out for, I believe, 2 games. I think Dimitri Johnson, Mahalis, Lowry, and Skylar Cook has kind of, I don't know if I've made a full note of it yet in a notebook or anything like that, but Skylar Cook looks solid from what I've seen. I don't have a great feel of what the first team and second team defenses or third team or whatever, what that's all kind of shaken out to be quite yet, outside of Christian Ellis, starting safety and all that. But I don't know. It feels it just feels like a room that's kind of lacking in experience right now. And you can get experience pretty quickly. It's just how that kind of comes and, how much of an issue that ends up being. Because it won't be an issue for a guy like Johnson. I don't think it's going to be an issue for a guy like Mahalis. But just kind of the rest of the room, how they pick up all that and get those kind of necessary reps. That's a big question I have. And, how you kind of break in that relatively inexperienced room. So in terms of a confidence rating, I'm going to go ahead and give this a 4 out of 10. I think like some of the other defensive positions that could go up depending on who they add in the portal. But I don't know. I don't think you want to stand pat and bring this group into the fall. That's not a criticism on a player. It's just, you ideally want some more experience and you want to add there. In terms of that, this is the second podcast of Reider's Block. We're always looking to interact with our listeners. We would love to do an on-air mailbag. So if you have any listener questions, feel free to send them to sreider@ABQ Journal or just reach me on Twitter. You can listen to last episode and this episode of Reider's Block on the Albuquerque Journal Podcast Network. You can also listen to episodes of Talking Grammar, Prep Central, Tech Outlook, and the Leading Ladies of Rio Rancho on Spotify, SoundCloud, and Apple Podcast, and of course YouTube if you wanted to watch. That's all I have for today. Thank you so much for listening.